Welcome to another episode of The Real Diagnosis. We're going to be continuing the conversation today in regards to mental health and in the current circumstances that surround our society with a pandemic, a polarizing political atmosphere, uncertainty of the future, and everything that we knew about how we live our lives changing every single day. So it is my honor to bring on our next guest. Her name is Saadia Baig. She is a certified clinical trauma professional. She's worked in several community initiatives in regards to mental health. She's worked with the Muslim Association of Bolingbrook. She's been with Women's Support Group and has participated in lots of different community engagement activities, works with the Islamic Center of Naperville, and currently she works in a private clinical practice. I'd like to welcome to the show Saadia Baig. Thank you so much for coming on.
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So let's jump right in. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Mhm.
Kind of a little bit about some of the things that you've experienced in the past, and just kind of give us a brief introduction.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a licensed professional counselor. I have my master's in counseling. I work a lot with addictions to all different forms. My area of interest have kind of gone over to depression, anxiety, postpartum, infertility, adjustment disorders, grief, all those different things. And more than ever now, I'm seeing adjustment related issues popping up in people, or just something that's been overstimulated. So that's what I'm seeing. As far as the kind of work I'm doing, I'm in private practice full time currently, and I'm seeing people from all walks of life. A lot of Muslim clients coming in, and it's actually been quite a lot of intake calls we've been receiving from Muslim families. But yeah, that's if I'm answering your question right.
Yeah. And so have you noticed, essentially in your practice and speaking with colleagues who work in the same field, what have you noticed since this pandemic started? How have people been responding to that?
So from the initial stages of this happening, a lot of people felt like they were very lost. Nothing was connecting. It felt like a movie that you were just kind of watching on Netflix. Emotions weren't connecting to reality.
Yeah.
All that was kind of going on. So, you come into like mid-April. By that point, people are like, okay, well, this is kind of really happening. So people who were already kind of dealing with adjustment related issues, those were amplified. People who were, kind of dealing with depression, anxiety, they were compartmentalized in another way. And then there was this new emotion that was emerging, which was grief. Recognizing that life as we knew it was gone or changed. And this was like from the grief perspective of losing everything, and kind of having to work backwards and to recognize like, okay, what we still have. But a lot of emotions for grief, and between my colleagues and other platforms that I kind of engage in, this was a more common emotion, grief.
Do you think what are some of the tools that maybe we were lacking, or something that maybe the skills we didn't have to prepare us to deal with this, with for example having to deal with this sort of grief, to understand that the way that we were used to was not going to be the way moving forward?
Sure, yeah. So recognizing first, every person has individual life things happening. Things are chaotic, and we all individually live in a world where we're the main character, and things are always happening. And either they are against us, or they're for us, or this is how we make sense of the world. How do we continue making sense of the world when something that we had never envisioned would happen in our lifetime? It was like a yesteryear, the Spanish flu, something happens. Like, we live in this high technology world. This stuff is not going to happen. But then this happens, and everyone's kind of like, okay, well, I'm hopeful things will change. I'm hopeful things are going to be, getting better. But then the equipment, when you talk about how can we better be equipped with this, like, how do we deal with life's changes? How have you been dealing with life's changes? Some people did really like, yeah, it's okay. I'm dealing with it. I'm alive. I'm doing well. Other people are like, this sucks. Like, this is just terrible. I don't know if I can go on. Suicidal thoughts, ideations, lack of motivation, all that is kind of emerging. But then a sidetrack to that is, I will ask my clients more often than not, is like, well, how were you coping before? Let's talk about some other traumatic experiences in your life. How did you cope? And more often than not, that's where the kind of, the meat of the issue kind of lies, where they haven't coped well with other things. And then you throw a pandemic on that. It's like, oh, well, this is just, the grief is like overflowing at that point.
Yeah. And so I think something that we've noticed, at least in the emergency department, is people are constantly asking me, and I think they're probably asking you as well, when is this all going to be over? And I think the uncertainty of everything is probably what adds to the frustration, and it adds to the anxiety, because people just want to know, well, when can I move forward with my life? And everything from schools to the workplace to even events that we do to socialize, everything is kind of on pause at this point, and we're not sure when things can go back to how they were. What is your advice, or what would be your recommendation to somebody who's saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to plan for things. I'm This anxiety of this uncertainty is really, really starting to take its toll.
Hmm. So some of the things, like, I will have some clients who come on and we'll just, I do telehealth now. So they will just sit there for 5 minutes. Say, I don't know how I got here. I don't know what to do anymore. So after that few, we've been bringing the venting point like backwards. I'm like, we start out with 5. You got to come back to 20 seconds. And that's where we're going to be. Because that's the thing. This is, first of all, radical acceptance. This
Yeah.
is happening. This is real. We can't change it. It is what it is. That radical acceptance also comes in bits and pieces. It's not it, because you're going through several emotions daily. How are you going to equip with that when you recognize, okay, but this is reality. I have to accept it. I might not like it. That's the one component I like to remind my clients. You might not like it. I don't like it. No one likes it. But guess what? It's happening. And the further you move away from the reality, the more difficult it is to accept what is currently happening. You don't have to like
And
it, but you have to accept it.
and so I think that's really an excellent point in regards to, just because you accept something does not mean that you're on board, or that you're okay with it, or that
Mhm.
you like it. It's really more of facing what the reality is. Do you notice that people, once they're able to accept that, is the next step to kind of start taking action, or really trying to move forward with things once you come to that acceptance?
Yeah. So in my experience, like I said, the radical acceptance part of it comes in bits and pieces, and depending on the emotionality. And now the other factor is people who are living with, others at home. Everyone is in your face. So, and in your space, even more so. So now you're taking on their anxieties, things that they're saying. One partner, like in a marriage, like one partner might be saying, like, this is just too much. I can't handle this. The kids are screaming in the background. I can't work. I just need to get out of this. Meanwhile, where you're in a good place and you're like, okay, this is not the ideal situation. I can accept it. The kids are home at least. I know they're safe. My spouse is home. But then when the person walks out and says this kind of shades a bit, the reality is like, okay, well, this is not good. This is not working out. So there's a lot of ups and downs when it comes to that emotion as well. But eventually there comes a point when someone's like, well, I've accepted this is happening. What do I do next? Like, well, words have to meet action as well. So what things do need to change? What can you accept about the situation? If you have to make a certain, a lot of the radical acceptance also comes from this place of trying to maladaptive coping. So it's like, well, I can't do anything about it. This all just sucks. I just have to accept it. It is what it is. Well, maybe it's not that way. Maybe how about we say, this is this way for now. Well, can it be different later? Yes. Can you accept that piece? And what are the steps of, accepting that piece? What will take you to accept that piece? And working from that perspective.
Yeah. And what have you seen with patients who have, or clients that you have, um, who have been able to, get to the point of radical acceptance, and you're following with them? What are some of the things they've come back and they've told you? How have they implemented that into their everyday lives? Any examples of just some simple things that people can do?
So one of the things, like one of my clients I'm working with for a very long time, their main issue was like they lack of job satisfaction. They did really well in their career, but they just weren't happy being at work, being in that environment. And it took us through March till like just this week to have this cathartic emotional experience. But you know what? I might not like my position, but I'm grateful. The gratitude. When the gratitude clicks in, that changes the perspective because your coping skills, the way you're kind of accepting the radical reality, that changes as well because the gratitude is like, well, you know what, I might not like my job, but I am also grateful that I'm not on the side where I'm struggling to find a job at my age, or I'm struggling to kind of make ends meet, or my children are suffering. I can accept this for now. That gratitude and acknowledgement, those are two key pieces with that, when you're unlocking the radical acceptance.
That's amazing. So many people have even come on this show, and even we just hear it with all of the professionals across the board who mention gratitude, who mention kind of just being looking at what you have and looking at it. Maybe some people could call it like glass half full as opposed to half empty, but just really being appreciative of the things that you have. Why is that? Why is that so hard for us sometimes to recognize those things? Why do we need maybe like a colleague or something to point that out for us? Why do you think that happens to us?
It kind of occurred, we were all like, our life came to a stop. It was fun at first. Everyone became a baker. We did things we hadn't tried in a little while. Everyone picked up a niche and there was like, oh, this is my thing. This is what I do in addition to what I do. But if you think, you go back to like January, where like, a lot of companies are going through their fiscal year, their promotional places, and, all their people are getting placed. It's a rat race where we're always driving for the next thing. There is never, maybe there's gratitude, but there's not acceptance of gratitude. And there's always like, what's the next best thing? Like, I've done this. What's the next best thing on my list? And achieving that kind of puts us in a mental space where we're not in the here and now, even with every achievement that we kind of, come through, or health or kids or just about anything. We can't accept it because like, yeah, okay, well, if I accept this, for some people, it's like, well, if I accept this, then does this mean my motivation to change, to get better, will just kind of come to a plateau kind of a space? And other people like, well, if I accept this, then what else do I have in life? Like, what else do I work for? So we just keep going. And but then we all have this dialogue. I'm grateful for what I have. But when you really put it into perspective and practice in the last 5, 6 months, that looks very different now. I think that's one of the major things that I've noticed anyway.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, it's easy to lose that balance. Let's take a quick commercial break here. We'll be back more with our guest, and we'll continue this conversation.
Billboards are popping up all over the country with an
Our neighbors don't realize that Muslims are absolutely opposed to ISIS.
Salam. My name is Abdul Malik Mujahid. I'm an imam in Chicago.
16 shots! No me! No justice! No me!
So how do we bring up the energy which can really have an impact on the world? You need to build bridges of understanding among people, and we need to have America moving forward.
That lesson learned had brought the strength of humanity to America, which is the diversity.
Mujahid Talks, only on Muslim Network TV. Faithfully connected.
This is The Real Diagnosis. We are talking about mental health in the age of COVID. We have our guest here, Saadia Baig, who has a lot of experience dealing with various communities and addressing mental health issues. I wanted to kind of touch on a couple of things. We know for a fact that COVID-19 has disproportionately affected minority communities. It has affected them in terms of mortality. And I'm sure, and we don't necessarily have the data, but I'm sure it'll prove this point, but also in terms of mental health and mental health issues, it's certainly something that's probably affected the community as well. You're somebody who has a lot of experience dealing with the Muslim community and various other communities. How can minority communities who maybe don't have the best access, or maybe it's a taboo in culture to maybe address mental health issues, how can we break that barrier and that stigma and get the appropriate care that we need so that our mental health is taken care of?
Yeah, so the community that I kind of reside with, and I'm really connected with the women in that community. A lot of what I was seeing in the past few, or I guess 6 months now, almost as well, this is happening, just acceptance, but acceptance with a different shade almost. It's like, well, this is happening, this is Allah's will, this is, and obviously it is, it's everything is going as per his plan, and that's the beauty of it. And that's one of my personal things that I truly believe is going as per his plan. But also there are other things that we can also be taken care of. So we talk about taboo. Unfortunately, mental health is still a taboo in our society, in our community, where either you are, crazy, or you're not normal, you're not doing well, that's why you're seeking therapy, or we never see the flip side of the coin that we're doing it as a sustainability to what we have learned. are coping. It's hard to see that. So some of the barriers in that is the way, there's many parts of this. One of them is like when immigrant parents are raising first generation children and they're raising their kids, there's a lot of barriers there in understanding their child. There are a lot of communication barriers. Some things are so taboo and off topic that you just don't bring it up. So that kind of further, kind of pulls the kids and the parents apart. And I'm just talking very specifically on the community that I kind of work with.
Yeah.
So they kind of pull apart completely. And there's the disconnect. It's like, well, my child is now listening. So previously I noticed what was happening was when there was this huge disconnect, it's like, some XYZ would call their friend and say, hey, I heard your kid is doing this youth program. Can you, in the end of our kids talk, can you get them to go ahead and join the youth group? Like, I need, this will be really great for them. It's like parents, they recognize something is happening on the outer edges. And this is how they found support. It's like, yeah, take my kid to, or I'll bring my kid to the mosque or the youth program. But those barriers are there now. We don't have, even if they are there, most parents are not utilizing because obvious reasons. We're all kind of afraid and keeping safe as well. That isn't there. So now it's like, well, all this is happening, this will get better. A lot of the family mentality takes control as well. Like, we just have to cope. You're in this, just deal with it. But then how do I deal with this?
Right.
You can throw someone an ocean in the biggest yacht, but if they don't know how to function it, how to work with it, then it's pointless.
Yeah
Those are some of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and then you've somebody who you've had plenty of clients and you've worked with them, and I'm sure you have your fair share of success stories. How do you work on getting that message out to other people who you think can benefit from this, and it can really make an impact in their lives? What are some of the things that you're able to communicate to them to maybe at least have them look at it with a maybe more open mind?
Definitely. Yeah. So I think this was back in April, I held it for our Muslim Association of Bolingbrook. I held an online webinar, how to deal with COVID related stress and, mental health and how to be mindful of it. So I think meeting the community where their needs are, if I'm trying to implement something like radical acceptance, this is great. You can take it, but that's not, the side they're chewing from because they're not there yet. But how do I make this, making mental health accessible, making information accessible, not necessarily like watering it down, but also condensing it maybe in a way that it's like, okay, well, you're experiencing this. Maybe this is what's happening. Do you see the connection of what's going on? And it's not about reaching the whole community because wonderfully, I mean, even though we're all social distancing, we all still work by, word of mouth that, oh, I heard from so-and-so, this is what's happening. So getting the right platform in the social community, in the right places, and having these open discussions, open dialogues, and opening it up to like the people as well to ask questions, so they don't feel as taboo anymore. When more than usually, and one person asks a question, 20 other people already asked a question in their minds. That connection, I think, connecting, building trust. That's another thing that Alliance, like what you're saying, if I don't know the answer, if I don't know how to resolve this, I will let you know that I'm unable to do it. But will I work on a different way of like discussing it? Yes, definitely. Can we work on it, figure something else out? For sure. But what are your barriers? Where are you coming from? If someone does approach me, I often had like ladies would approach me after a group sessions, like, I am experiencing this, but I was afraid of asking them, like, you know what, you're not the only person who mentioned this today. Right. Would it be okay if I brought this up in our next session or in a webinar? Would you be comfortable with that? I'm not, it's not directly at you, but would that be okay? And that's how I feel like dialogues, they open up. This is a way to kind of really, truly get at the community.
Yeah. And I think the other end of that too is the leaders that exist within the community, the imams and the community leaders. I think engaging them and letting them know kind of what are some of the services that are being provided and how they can help. I think that's also another big step because they're trusted members of the community, and if they're saying, yeah, this might work for us, I think other people in the community who may have been closed-minded about it may open their mind suddenly and say, okay, well, maybe I should give this a try. Yeah. What do you think about, schools are starting to open, depending on where you live in Chicago or in the Chicagoland area. Some kids are going back to school. Some are doing half at home, half learning. Some are doing some remote learning. In all of this is just really kind of either disrupted a family unit or made a family unit really concerned about whether the safety was at risk if somebody's child had to go back to school full time. How have how has that? What have you noticed in your experience, in your practice, even your personal experience, and for this transition? What are some of the problems that you've noticed as a result of it?
Is this is a very interesting topic, and it always touches, base with me. I'm a mom of three, so
Mm,
I have all three of my kids homeschooling, and I was just sharing this conversation with a client yesterday. Like, you're expected to work as if you don't have a family, and you have to run a family as if you don't have work. Those two realities were very separate at one point.
yeah.
They were just enough touching, rubbing off each other, but never intersecting. Now everything is together. Everything, the vulnerabilities are there. All the issues are there. How do you combat that? How do you work as a family unit? Those, and how we are functioning as, how we have been functioning as a family. And I guess I would like a little bit of clarification on your question too, because I think in the midst of me talking, I kind of lost
Eh,
that.
No, that's all right. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. So you're somebody who's homeschooling. Um, that's that. There are several families now that are going to be doing that for the very first time. People who probably had their kids in schools, going to schools. So there's that transition that's there, and I'm sure it's difficult for parents and it's for children alike. What are some of the obstacles or some of the challenges that you see for these families, and something that maybe you'd recommend or something you'd advise for them to look out for?
Definitely. So when it comes to like looking out for your family dynamics, something isn't working. Your child is behaving or acting out in ways they never have acted out before. For parents to have that openness for vulnerability, that this is happening within the family unit, how are we going to deal with this? We're not going to be able to deal with this one with a shouting match, one parent yelling, the other parent yelling, and the kids are yelling. It's just a chaotic situation. But actually recognizing, and I think it's a really important, especially in our community, and one of the taboos to talking to your kids about creating a family plan. We have typically kind of been raised like, oh, these are like the adult matters. You don't come into this. This is what you just need to follow. I drop you off here at 9 o'clock. I pick you up at 3. This is how it worked before, or for many families anyway. But now it's like everyone has to be a component of the family unit at home. If you're not being that, then everyone is kind of like polarized and doing their own thing. Having conversation, like for example, with my children, my children are very young, all under the ages of 10. So I will say, you know what, I'm going in a meeting. Is there something that you need right now? Like, what are some things that I can help you with? If there is, and I let them know this is, and making, we don't realize how independent kids really are
Mhm.
till they're, because we don't see them in school. We don't see that personality. We have no idea how independent they really are and how dependent we make them on ourselves when we're at home. Having these open conversations, if you need help, this is a time that I can help you. Being open, and this does take a constant verbalization kind of piece. It's like, well, I'm going to be busy right now. I can help you at this time. Can you help me with this? What rules is each person playing? It cannot be that one person is just playing all the roles in the home and being the facilitator, the moderator, the backstage person, you name it. Like, they're doing all the roles. It cannot be. And then actors just come on and they just leave. So really figuring out what is working for our family, maybe what didn't work could work, kind of saying that, and looking at your kid. If your child is acting out, what are their needs? Like, are you being able to connect with them? Can you have a conversation with them? And one thing I really, really, really like to remind my clients and people I meet in the community, affection for your child is not a sign of failure, vulnerability on your end, or that you're giving in. Affection is never any one of those things. Of course kids are going to act up. They're home, they're cooped up, just like many of us are. They're being homeschooled, or when they come, if they're doing a hybrid version, they're coming home and they can't go anywhere else, or now they no longer can meet their grandparents. Their lives are shifting more than ours are. They're having a very difficult time because they're not there mentally, where they cognitively anyway, that they can have these discussions or recognize these emotions. They're struggling as well. And I think as parents, and this is like the strange dynamic, because we could be having our own issues, obviously, but having the conversation piece that this is how I'm open to you. And even if you're angry, because of course kids are going to do things to upset us, and to upset each other, they're hitting, they're biting, or whatever else is going on. But affection, number one thing I remind my parents, affection.
Mhm.
It is not going to make you feel you're like, oh, if I give in, she's always going to cry this way for a cracker while I'm in a meeting. No, it's not going to happen. Affection, that's not how affection works. You're not manipulating your child. You're providing affection. And when you're providing affection, recognize that this is not manipulation. you're being cognizant of your emotions. You're being, you're being available for them in the here and now, and not what happened 10 minutes ago.
Right. Right.
If that answers your question a bit.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think there's been a lot of stress on different families, especially with all of the changes. We've been asking parents to wear so many different hats, and we've been asking students to really kind of, hey, we're not sure what's going to happen, so stand by. So there's so many factors at play. So I can't even imagine the stress that's been on the family unit. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll come back and we'll wrap up. I'm hoping we can hit some points, maybe some advice that we can give people moving forward, some things that they can do, and we'll be back. So stay tuned.
Assalamu alaikum.
I love Adam's World because it makes me learn in a fun way. That Adam has a green face and orange hair. I like this song. I like how Adam sings. I like Adam's World because it makes me happy. What? No. 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 And here's Adam and here's Anissa. Adam is and his sister. Adam is a boy and he is really smart.
Download the new Adam's World app at adamsworldapp.com and let's help tomorrow's Muslims today.
Welcome back, everyone. This is The Real Diagnosis. We've had an incredible discussion today. I wanted to wrap up our last few minutes here with Saadia Baig, and just in regards to how we're going to approach the uncertain future. There are a lot of different things that are happening. So many kids, so many students, people who are supposed to graduate or maybe move on to high school or middle school. So many of them have had their lives just totally disrupted. The status quo was not maintained, obviously, since March, and so many things have changed for them, and so many things could continue to change. Right now is really kind of this experimental phase for so many different families and students. How, I guess my question to you would be, if you know somebody's going to be going through these challenges and they weren't sure what was ahead, what are some of the recommendations that you would provide for them in terms of maintaining a mindset or an outlook moving forward? How can they approach this?
Definitely. So I think my number one thing is let's create your toolbox. Things that you can take out, that your coping skills, to your other mechanisms, to remembering how you've coped with, other situations, take those out. In creating that toolbox, looking at your own cues, personal cues, and vulnerability to stress and anxiety, how prevalent it was always in your life. For a lot of people, mental health has become a newer topic, and they were unaware of it completely, or very aware of it, and having this other thing, and they're trying to fit COVID into separate pieces of their life because it's affecting everything. Looking at your own cues. What didn't make sense before? What were some of the things? This takes a lot of self-awareness and mindfulness as well. And I would always encourage everyone to look into simple mindfulness books, exercise workbooks, to worksheets. There's so much stuff online as well. Looking into it just to, sometimes all you need is that one sentence to kind of click you into reality, and also to understand how can I become mindful? What are my own, what makes me depressed? What is difficult for me? Having these deep conversations with yourself. Journaling is a great experience where you can actually sit down and think, well, what is bothering me? What has always bothered me? Is it directly correlated with COVID, or just further amplified? Those pieces. And then I think people begin to have this really fine line of diffusion where they recognize this is not COVID induced. There were a lot of issues already happening, whether in my marriage or with my kids or at home or work, my family. All these issues were very present. I just didn't have that time, or I wasn't in the place where I could discuss these or even wanted to. But now I'm kind of forced to, because there's another level of vulnerability that exists there. So knowing what are your cues, And with families as well, knowing your parenting values, do they match up? Before, maybe it was easier to get by because everyone was outside of the house. Now everyone is home. Looking at parenting values, if what is not working, your kids are also changing. Do you have space in your values for the kids' changes or the life changes, even on a personal level? Do you have room in your value set for that? Can you change through that? What are you willing? What is worth keeping the same, and what is necessary to change? I think those will be some of my like advice or encouraging points for my clients anyway, that this is how you're going to kind of come to terms with what's happening.
And you mentioned mindfulness, and that's something that I'm hearing more and more about, not just for my patients, but even for myself as a professional. Um, can you touch on why mindfulness is important, and for people who are not familiar with it, what does it mean? There are so many different ways that someone can experience mindfulness, and you mentioned a few examples that I thought were excellent. So, just maybe like a brief introduction to somebody who isn't really familiar with it.
Sure. So mindfulness kind of comes from, DBT, which is a dialectical behavioral therapy. It's a component of that. With mindfulness, you are fully aware. That also constitutes self-awareness of what you're feeling. I guess a brief example I can give you is if I tell my client to go on a walk in the morning, notice one flower and see how many times you see it throughout. Every time that you have a thought, I want you to kind of replace it with something, becoming aware of how many times you're having a certain thought, how many times you're repeating a certain behavior, what are the consequences of those behaviors. And it's about like checking and catching yourself. So before you have those thoughts, I don't know if I'm answering this. It's hard to answer this big mindfulness question in in a sentence or two, but being aware, so consciously aware of every thought that occurs, every situation that's happening, what my reactions is, what my emotions are. Do I have a primary emotions, like how I immediately react to things, and what are my secondary reactions to it? Can I begin to like diffuse it and just have a mindful awareness of it that says like, hey, I'm going through something, but these are the ways that I can, basically getting it into your psyche, that this is what's kind of happening, this is what I'm feeling, this is the way I can work down from this. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, and how can we benefit from that?
Definitely. So for example, like when we're praying, what are the connections that we're developing when we're standing in salah? We're in this mindset that we are praying. It could be anything around us, like literally anything could be, unless it's dangerous or life threatening, but we could be there on the prayer mat, and despite what's going on, we're focused on something, and we're continuously placing that focus on the prayer, so we don't forget what rakah we're on, whatsoever we just said. We are so hyper focused on it, but in a really meaningful way, because we're doing an action where we have to recite the ayahs from the Quran, but at the same time being mindful of how many times we're doing, and not letting anything else come into the awareness. That'll be one of the most, I guess, nicer ways I can explain how you can become mindful. So when you're and taking that example forward, like when you're having those issues, recognizing, well, what is working? I'm afraid, I'm getting scared, my fear factor is like, my radar is like going up. What are some things what am I more fearful about? Can I eliminate some of that fear? Have I worked on this fear before? Does this truly exist? Is this part of reality, or something that I just kind of come up with in my mind when I am feeling fearful?
Yeah, I think that's a great note for us to leave off and end the program with. I want to thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation. I think we covered some really, really important topics for people, and I hope a lot of folks who are watching this can benefit from some of the advice that you've imparted on us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this.
So tune in next week for the next episode of The Real Diagnosis. I want to thank our guest again. We will continue to try to bring topics that are relevant to everyone, and I hope that you will stay tuned in. We appreciate it. Salam and peace, everyone.